Seni punya nyawa. Seni punya kuasa. Seni mencetuskan perasaan yang tiada taranya. Seni merupakan pemacu negara. Seni menyatukan kita dalam meraihkan dan menyalurkan tenaga kita ke haluan baharu. Pelaburan demi kesenian Malaysia adalah pelaburan demi jiwa kita. Seni mewakili sejarah terindah dan masa depan kita. Cendana mendorong kita ke hadapan. Dan dari sini, kita bangkit.
Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Ipoh Muzik Simposium 2021 Nusantara dianjurkan oleh Port Ipoh, Gerakan Seni Ipoh dan Kerajaan Negeri Perak dengan sokongan dari Cultural Economy Development Agency Cendana dan Tourism Perak. Sidang Meja Bulat merupakan sebuah lagi acara dalam Ipoh Muzik Simposium 2021 Nusantara yang akan membincangkan sebuah buku bertajuk Made in Nusantara Studies in Popular Music Routledge 2021. Sidang ini akan dimudahcarakan oleh Dr. Patricia N. Hardwick, pensyarah kanan di Fakulti Muzik dan Seni Persembahan, Universiti Pendidikan Sultan Idris UPSI. Dr. Patricia N. merupakan seorang pensyarah di Fakulti Muzik dan Seni Persembahan, Universiti Pendidikan Sultan Idris UPSI. Beliau mempunyai ijazah kedoktoran falsafah dalam bidang cerita rakyat dan etnomuzikologi serta antropologi dari Indiana University Bloomington. Selain berpengalaman sebagai tenaga pendidik, beliau juga mempunyai pengalaman sebagai kurator bersama Katie Foley dalam meneroka seni wayang kulit dan tarian mayung yang merupakan warisan negeri Kelantan. Jadi tanpa membuang masa, dipersilakan Dr. Pat. So let's welcome Dr. Pat.
Okay, thank you. Dulu saya nak kata macam ribuan terima kasih kepada Port Ipoh dan pun kepada Ipoh Music Symposium. For today, actually, we're going to have our session in English, right? And that is because we have representatives from both Indonesia and Malaysia, and our book also contains writings from people from the Philippines, Indonesia, and Singapore and Malaysia. So we want to make this really an event that's internationally accessible. So I am very honored that my colleagues and friends have invited me to become the moderator for this roundtable. I want to waste no time in introducing the book that we're going to be discussing today. So Made in Nusantara, it's the first book of its kind in the Routledge Global Popular Music Studies series, and it presents a wide range of studies on popular music in the Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore, and Malaysia. And through a critical investigation of specific genres and their spaces of performance, production, and consumption, this volume is organized into 4 thematic areas. 1, issues in Nusantara popular music. 2, history. 3, artists and genres. And 4, national versus local industries. So more importantly, this book is written by scholars of popular music who are working within our region, bringing together local perspectives about the history and analysis of popular music while being critically engaged with ideas about the subject of popular music developed in the West. So our roundtable discussion will feature the editors as well as some of the authors of the volume who are based in Peninsular Malaysia and Indonesia, with the purpose of sharing various perspectives about how Nusantara might be understood in examining select cases of popular music in Malaysia and Indonesia. So these cases will include the development of rock and roll in the region, the Malaysia Truly Asia campaign, Nasib Contemporary, and the Kuala Lumpur singer-songwriter scene of the early 2000s. Conceptually, our roundtable will consider the relationships and the dynamics between the traditional and the popular, Hijra as spiritual and musical mobility, and the Nusantara as a history of ideas, practices, and aesthetics that can be used to conceptualize this region's popular music as diverse yet interrelated in unique, fluid, and dynamic ways. And with that, I'm going to go straight to introducing our first panelist, who is also one of the editors of the volume. My colleague, Dr. Meiko Santayaya, is an associate professor and head of the Film and Performing Arts Department at Sunway University. He studied at the University of Hawaii at Manoa as an East-West Center Fellow, researching music and dance traditions of the extended Sulu Zone. Now that's found in East Malaysia, the Southern Philippines, and Eastern Indonesia. And he has looked at the links of the Sulu Zone to the Nusantara region. He carried out fieldwork for his doctoral studies in Central Sulawesi in Indonesia as a Fulbright recipient from 2012 to 2013. His research foci include the study of music and dance within the extended Sulu zone, choreomusicology, and popular music in maritime Southeast Asia. Silakan, Dr. Meko.
Thank you, Pat, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. If we can go ahead and play the video that was sent to the committee. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank you for sticking around and watching this roundtable at the last day of this conference. I would also like to thank the organizers of the conference for inviting us to present this roundtable discussion, which is based on the recent publication made in Nusantara that we've edited together with Adil. We're very much looking forward to sharing some of the conceptualizations of the region, the music, and different styles that are quite prominent in this part of the world. This presentation serves largely as an introduction to the roundtable discussion, and then we will proceed with the different case studies by the various chapter authors that are present today. The title of my presentation is Revisiting the Traditional and the Popular in Maritime Southeast Asia. The field of popular music has been defined and redefined at both the global and regional level. During this ongoing process, popular music scholars have acknowledged a geographical Anglo-American and English language-centric nature of cultures and media studies. The Made In series in many ways have paved the way for regional conceptualizations of national genres and experiences, as highlighted by Shin and Lee in 2017 in their Made in Korea volume, as well as negotiations with Western forms focused on local aesthetics, as highlighted by Mitsui in his Made in Japan volume. Considering these developments, we decided to embark on this project envisioning new analytical strategies towards what is considered as the popular through a historical overview, alternative conceptualizations, and finally, rationales for a Nusantara popular music praxis. The development of popular music in what is at times conceptualized as maritime Southeast Asia is characterized by shared musical experiences in the region. The conceptualization of popular music as such in the region is largely a 21st century experience, strongly influenced by Anglophone discourses and approaches to this field of study. The use of English loanwords for categories in national languages such as popular na música sa Pilipinas in the Philippines and music popular in Indonesia and Malaysia poses at times challenges to the examination of popular experiences in the region. Even though scholars translated the term popular music into Indonesian at the end of the 20th century, pop as a genre developed in various directions since the 1960s, such as Pinoy pop in the Philippines, pop yeye in Malaysia, and pop daerah in Indonesia. Pop genres were largely a post-independence episode and an offshoot of popular experiences that took many shapes following the colonial period. New genres reflected a process that both popularized the indigenous and indigenized the popular. The following discussion proposes 5 possible degrees. The first degree is national renditions of global genres. This degree considers global genres largely Western influenced performed in maritime Southeast Asia. Examples of national renditions include jazz and Latin American genres during the beginning of the 20th century, pop and rock in the post-independence era, punk and heavy metal, and rap and hip-hop from the end of the 20th century onwards. The next degree considers pop in the post-independence national genres developed along with national industries. An example of a national genre based on a global popular music form is kugiran, which was influenced by the rock and roll craze of the 1960s and the electric guitar. Another style that appears throughout the Nusantara region is the balada, at times distinctive as a genre, as it happens in eastern Indonesia, but often as a style of pop. Others drew upon the styles of Western rock bands, such as the rock kapak groups of the 1980s in Malaysia and Singapore, which sang in Malay and were also influenced by the balada style. The next degree are national popular genres within the Nusantara region. This degree considers new national genres that developed after independence and were largely supported by national industries that flourished during the 1970s. A classic example is dangdut in Indonesia, popularized by Roma Irama, based on the Orkes Melayu or Malay orchestra with influences from popular genres of the 1950s, such as Indian, Latin, Arabic, and Malay music. Another national phenomenon with regional renditions was pop daerah or regional pop, which comprised pop songs sung in the languages of specific ethnic groups, and at times included the addition of traditional melodic and rhythmic ornamentation. In Malaysia and the Philippines, popular rock and folk musicians incorporated traditional instruments and musical idioms, such as Dato' M. Nasir in Malaysia and Joey Ayala in the Philippines. The next degree are extrinsically popularized traditions. This degree considers social genres, often both music and dance, sung in the national language and popularized by the national industry via new composers and performers. The development of the music industry during the 1970s produced new repertoires that were based on traditional genres such as joget, inang, asli, ghazal, dikir barat, and zapin, among others. Over time, a number of singers, including Noranisa Idris and Siti Nurhalisa, released modern renditions of traditional genres. The late Panga was a prominent composer and exponent of Irama Malaysia music, an illustrative genre of extrinsically popularized traditions. Lastly, I posit intrinsically popularized traditions. Closest to the popularization of the indigenous in the proposed continuum lie popular renditions of traditional forms, largely sung in regional languages and influenced by aesthetics of regional industries. A notable influence is the use of the keyboard to add melody, harmonic accompaniment, and rhythmic background to new genres such as campur sari in Central Java, which is played with gamelan instruments. This type also considers genres such as dikir barat, a tradition in Kelantan that is popularized through competitions and popular singers in Malaysia. The proposed continuum does not assert fixity of what is considered popular or traditional, but rather presents a negotiated fluidity of what is indigenized and popularized in the region as alternative modernities. Revisiting the conceptualizations of the popular as a continuum that both popularizes and indigenizes not only revisits Anglophone hegemonic discourses of the field, including Western rhetorics and frameworks, but also privileges a focus on unique perspectives and the provocative concept of the local genius, current in regional performance discourses. The examination of the shared historical degrees of colonialism, independence, nationalism, and the development of both national and regional industries highlight alternative modernities and Southeast Asian redefinitions of the loan word and time-specific exonym popular. Thank you very much. Now we proceed to the presentation of various case studies by the chapter's authors. Over to you, Pat.
Thank you, Dr. Mako. So I will waste no time in introducing our next panelist, and that's Michael H.B. Raditya, who is a researcher, critic, and writer who is interested in popular music, the anthropology of art, performance studies, and culture. He works as a journal manager at the Performing Arts and Visual Arts Study Program, Universitas Gadjah Mada in Yogyakarta. Michael is the editor-in-chief of Laras, Studies of Music in Society, an independent music research group and website, which he has been publishing online articles on popular music studies since 2014. He is also the founder of www.dandutstudies.com that distributes research about Dandut and is the author of the book, and I will read the English title for now, Outlining Memories, Creating Events, published by Lintang Pusaka Utama and Senripla in 2018. And I hope that I got the publication name correct. Please do tell us about your work, Mr. Michael. We're very interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Hi, everyone. I hope you're well and healthy there. So in this book, first I would like to thanks for Mr. Michael and Bang Adil for having me in this book. In this book, my title in my article is the popularization and contestation of Dangdut Koplo, the Indonesian music industry. So I wrote about Koplo, Dangdut Koplo in this book, one of the regional Dangdut variants from East Java. Like Pak Michael said before in his presentation, there's like a pop daerah there. And then in the Dangdut, there's like a Dangdut Pusat dan Central in Jakarta, and also in Dangdut daerah. And one of the Dangdut daerah is Dangdut Koplo from East Java. I know that Dangdut has been written by many scholars, starting from William Frederick, like historians. He wrote about Roma Irama and his style. And then there is Andrew Wentrap. The book is Dangdut Stories, and I think that he wrote many articles about Dangdut. And then there's Lono Simatupang. The Lono Simatupang wrote the style and the class of Dangdut in his thesis. And then there's a Park and Salam. They wrote about the Inul Daratista. But few of them wrote about Dangdut Koplo. For Dangdut Koplo, Wentrap once wrote about it in an article, but I feel some things can still be articulated more. So in this book, I was trying to reveal what is the Dangdut Koplo and the development of the Dangdut Koplo. On the other side, I have interacted with Dangdut music for a long time. So I tried to elaborate my experience, research data, and literature about Dangdut and also Dangdut Koplo. As a result, in this book, I provide views that anyone has never written before, because I was trying to see what is the dynamic of Dangdut Koplo. And then I look at the Dangdut Koplo by the context of the existence. So starting from the contestation of Dangdut and Dangdut Koplo, in Dangdut there is like there is a reason why I wrote about Dangdut Koplo, because in the Dangdut landscape there is like contestation between Dangdut and Dangdut Koplo. For your information, Roma Irama, the king of Dangdut, doesn't agree with the Dangdut Koplo. This construction like haunts the Dangdut music listener. So if there is a new Dangdut listener from Jakarta, I think he or she will mock the Dangdut Koplo. So, but for me, the contestation is only product of power and economy. So I think that the contestation only about the power and the economy things, because when I went to the East Java in 2017. When I researched about Dangdut in East Java, I saw Koplo, Dangdut Koplo, as their medium of expression, wherever they are, and how they are growing rapidly. So every event in East Java, there's a Dangdut Koplo. So I think that I didn't get the contestation in East Java like in Jakarta. So that's why I put the problem of the Dangdut and Dangdut Koplo in this book, and I'm trying to show the readers how the dynamic of Dangdut Koplo, and then I try to deals with the local aesthetic versus national standard. It means like national standard is in music industry in Central in Jakarta in Indonesia, versus the local aesthetic, it's like the East Java. So and when I went there, I think that there were many variety in there. And then if we talk about the existence, I think that like I look at the journey of the koplo in the context the industry music, and then I wrote that the koplo gained popularity several times and how they did it. I wrote that there were 3 periods in this book, like Inul Daratista, like the contestation down to end of koplo. So I start with the problem, and then I try to show the other period, like in 2010, there's like You Keep Smile is a television program that brought the dangdut koplo and their music, and then and then the impact of that dangdut koplo gained the popularity for the second times, and then the end of the popularity, I think that in 2017 when the dangdut koplo has a new generation of that, like Via Palena, Karisma, Rana Antika, and so on. So like I'm trying to reveal the dynamic of the dangdut koplo with the problem, and then I'm trying to solve it. So the readers, I think that can see what is dangdut koplo and how they change. I think that it's enough for now. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you very much for telling us about your work. And I hope we can engage more a little bit about talking about your chapter, which I read, which was really interesting, and the sort of issues that you look at between Roma, Irama, and Inul, and the different forms of dangdut that do develop in Indonesia. I think that's going to be a really scintillating conversation. So just to keep things rolling around a little bit, because we're rolling on, we're trying to give everybody a brief introduction to the work, and then we're going to get into a discussion with all of our scholars. So the next scholar who will tell us about his work is Adil Johan, who is a senior lecturer and research fellow at the Institute of Ethnic Studies, KITA, University Kebangsaan, Malaysia. His research analyzes aspects of popular music in mass media that intersect with issues of interculturalism, cosmopolitanism, mobility, intimacy, affect, and gender. Such research has been published in articles in the Journal of Intercultural Studies and Kajian, Malaysia. His PhD thesis, awarded by King's College London, was developed into a book on independence-era Malay film music titled Cosmopolitan Intimacies, published by NUS Press in 2018. He also performs and records as a saxophonist for Azmil Yunor Orkes Padu and Nadir. So without further ado, please do tell us about your work. And I should also note that Adil Johan is also an editor for this volume. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Patricia, and Assalamualaikum and Selamat Petang, and thank you everyone for joining us. Actually, I have my slide up. Is it okay for me to get? Yes, terbaik. Okay. So I'm just going to very quickly go over the chapter that I wrote in this book. Is actually about the late Allahyarham Pak Zubir Said. Yeah. So Zubir Said. Actually, there was actually another presentation today about Zubir Said, a wonderful presentation by Saudara Muhammad Farid. So I'm looking forward to see more of that work as well. So hopefully we can tie a bit the connections between Zubir Said and the Nusantara. Yeah. So this is a picture of Chua Miati's national language class painting. In it was written in this time of independence in the 50s. And you can see a Malay teacher, of course it's set in Singapore, teaching the phrase, siapa nama kamu, okay, di mana awak tinggal, right, to the citizens, to these non-Malay students, right. This is a kind of emphasization. This is actually a part of the Nanyang art movement, and it was kind of picturing the moment of Singapore kind of nationalism, which featured Malay as the official national language of the country. But it also kind of ties into these issues about how Singapore is kind of surrounded by a very Malay world, right, within the Nusantara region. Pak Zubir's side, has a very cosmopolitan biography. He comes from Bukit Tinggi in Sumatra, and he came to Singapore before World War II to pursue his career as a bangsawan artist, and through that he became a composer and composed many music, and now we know him as a composer of film music, lots of educational music, but most importantly, the composer of Majulah Singapura, which is actually the national anthem of Singapore, which is sung in Malay and is still sung in Malay till this day. Of course, the issues, the controversy that lies around this is that a lot of Singaporeans, especially those who are not born ethnic Malay, sing this without necessarily understanding the words of the lyrics, because a lot of Singaporeans have lost their ability to speak the Malay language, which is also a widely used lingua franca in the Nusantara. So what I found in my research, my early research while I was doing a PhD, is that actually Pak Zubir was also a staunch Malay nationalist in 1967. So this is read against the fact that he is also seen as a national icon for what is idealized as a multicultural Singapore. Okay, but in the 60s, he was publishing and participating in activities that were really trying there was part of this moment in this post-war moment in the Malay world, or in the Nusantara. They was trying to idealize a post-colonial indigenous-led nationalism, and that would be categorized at the moment under a Malay kind of nationalism. And of course, at that time, it wasn't clear yet whether Singapore would be a part of the Federation of Malaysia. It was, of course, it joined eventually with Sabah and Sarawak, but then it seceded, or if you want to be more harsh, it was kicked out by the Federation of Malaysia. Okay. However, in recent times, the connection between Singapore and Malaysia is very close. We are just divided, we are just separated by a very short causeway. I'm from Penang, and the bridge that connects Penang to Kedah, to Penang land, to Seberang, than the causeway, and this is a completely different country. It's a national border. But of course, we know, prior to COVID, when I say mobilization, I'm also talking about the kind of mobilities that we have between Singapore and Malaysia. So this causeway is not only a physical link between the two countries' national and cultural history, it's also like this kind of conceptual and cultural link between Singapore and Malaysia that is kind of tied through this general conception about Malay nationalism. Okay, and of course, Zubir's side, for me, for Singaporeans, he is celebrated. This is a picture of his daughter's book launch, and it was officiated by both the former Prime Minister of Malaysia, Pak Lah, Abdullah Badawi, Rais Yatim, very prominent cultural minister, and also a minister from Singapore. So there's this kind of like cross-Singapore collaboration going on. Of course, Datin Sri Rohana Zubir is in Malaysia now. She kind of tetapkan di Malaysia. She kind of set her life in Malaysia. And this is an event that I was actually fortunate to go to in 2012. There were a lot of events commemorating Pak Zubir's side in Singapore, because the national government was actively trying to promote its indigenous and local arts, and they actually paid a special attention to Malay Singaporeans as well as important contributors to Singapore's national culture. In this event, it was a concert to commemorate Pak Zubir's side. And you can see from the liner notes for this buku program, this program book, that the artistic director kind of paints Zubir's side as a hero of our race, culture, and country. So if you are a Singaporean going in, the readership for this is of course directed to Malay Singaporeans, right? Our race, culture, and country. What about the non-Malay Singaporeans? So of course, as somebody who attended the concert, a concert like this, remembering Zubir's side, is 90% or more attended by only Singaporean Malay audience. So you can see that there is a kind of ethno-nationalist approach to this concept. But of course, in Singapore, ethno-nationalism is not encouraged, right? But the way that I've seen it is that, there's something juicy coming up. The way that I see it is that, of course, this is the way that the Malay minorities in Singapore claim a stake on their contributions to the Singaporean nation, and then while still also emphasizing that the Malay identity, right, and how that is an important contribution to Singapore's national culture. When I was sitting through this concert, at the end of the concert, everybody got up to sing Majulah Singapura. Now, myself being a Malaysian and only starting my fieldwork there, I was very embarrassed. I didn't know how to sing Majulah Singapura, right? I didn't know. Somebody stood up out of respect, and we all sang Majulah Singapura. Everyone was so proud and happy, right? And I heard from the crowd, somebody say, of course, this was gurau lah, he was joking only, right? Hidup Melayu, hidup UMNO, when the singing was, ending. And this got me thinking lah, oh wow, what's happening here? There is a kind of contestation, right? Even though it's done in jest. And I would argue in my book that it's a kind of cultural intimacy that's coming out. These are the things that the Singaporean government is embarrassed to admit, that maybe a lot of Malays in Singapore have a sense of shared history with Malaysia and the Malay nationalist movement, right, of that time. But it is a very contested time. There were racial riots, there were separations of the nation and whatnot. And this got me thinking about how important Zubair and his music, his contribution of the national anthem in the Malay language is to the contestations and the arguments and debates about what it means to be Singaporean and what it means to be a Malay Singaporean. So you see this commemoration of Zubair in the National Museum of Singapore. There's a huge poster that features the film, his contributions to film music, And you see, this is from the program book in this event, Majulah Singapura. And in the program book, which is, there's forwards written by ministers, and this is the National Museum Director, Lee Chor Lin. And there's an emphasis on how Zubair's music reminds us of Singapore's place in the Malay world. Let's think about Singapore geopolitically, right? Surrounded by Malay-speaking nations. But it is also inclusive and multicultural, right? So Singapore is painted as this inclusive multicultural space. Yes, I have 30 seconds left. But this to end, the concert was part of a mandate from the top that wanted a shift towards cultural policy. And it was about creating more local content in government organizations. And what we found was, yes, preserving heritage was also important, but this was the real finding. Like in 2011, there was actually an election, and the Singapore Workers' Party actually won a lot. Like they didn't win, they didn't, of course, upseat the PAP government, but there was signs of from the positive responses to them being voted in a lot of seats, that Singaporeans were unhappy about the dilution of what they thought was their national culture. So the Zubair events were actually this response to say, no, we do have a national culture, and also you have to refer to the Malay minority population, as a reference point for one of the major contributions of Singapore's national culture. So I'll end with that question. So is Pak Zubair, is he a Singapore arts icon or a Malay nationalist? So I'm hoping that if you read through the chapter, that you'll get a little insight into that, and hopefully we can bring this discussion forward in the context of music, or popular music more specifically, in the Nusantara.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Adil, and I'm sure we will talk about politics and nationalism and music in the Nusantara in our roundtable discussion. That actually is a nice bridge for us to go on and to introduce our next participant, who is Shazlin Amir Hamza, who holds a PhD in ethnic studies from UKM. Her thesis, titled Nation Branding, Popular Patriotic Songs and the Construction of the Malaysian Brand, focused on the top-down mobilization of national music in the construction of a nation brand or national identity. Her bachelor's degree was in advertising, and she eventually acquired a master's of communication in journalism. Shazlin is currently a senior lecturer and research fellow at the Institute of Ethnic Studies, KITA, University Kebangsaan, Malaysia. Apart from her interest in popular music heritage, she also looks into the study of popular songs as an effective and affective tool for the dissemination of sentiments on nationalism. Thank you very much, and we're looking very much forward to your presentation, Dr. Shazlin.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pat. Assalamualaikum semua dan selamat petang. Allow me to share my slides for today. Is this visible, Dr. Pat?
Yes, it's visible.
Can everyone see this? Dr. Pat? My chapter is Branding the Nation through Ahmad Nawab's Malaysia Truly Asia. So Malaysia Truly Asia was a song that was commissioned by the Tourism Ministry in the year 2000. It was composed by Datuk Ahmad Nawab. Its arrangement included the kompang. It also included Kelantan Wayang Kulit music. It also included some serunai and also some sounds of tabla, accordion, and seruling. This is Ahmad Nawab. All right, songs are malleable. It can be created to tell stories that help create a collective imagination of a group. In Malaysia, since music is a cultural marker, musicians are often expected to be at the forefront of the country and play a significant role in the process of nation branding. All right, so nation branding is a way of creating symbols and identification for a society to associate themselves and identify with an imagined community. The music chosen for these campaigns are often chosen from a shared history and cultures that contain a collective myth and symbols that hold the identity of the people together. So oftentimes, nation branding is self-conscious. It is often used by government aimed at producing a particular image of the nation state. It always involves the invention and reinvention of reputation of a political community and social entity. All right, so now I'm going to talk about the maestro himself. So Ahmad Nawab was born in Penang in 1933. His father was Nawab Khan. He originated from Pakistan. He traveled as a musician in an opera group known as Wayang Parsi that made performances around the Nusantara and eventually landed himself in Pulau Pinang. So Ahmad Nawab's childhood in Penang was amidst a colorful multi-ethnic background, amidst people from various ethnic origins. There were people from Minangkabau, Sumatra, to the Malabaris in India, and all the way to the Teochews of Hainan in China. So at 20 years old, Ahmad Nawab moved to Kuala Lumpur. He became a saxophonist for Bukit Bintang Cabaret in BB Park. In 1960, he joined RTM and was the first Malay to play the baritone saxophone with Orchestra RTM. That's Ahmad Nawab on the top upper hand corner. 1970s, he began honing the skills of various singers such as Salamia Hassan, Uji Rashid, Sharifah Aini, siblings Khadijah and Latif Ibrahim, Jamal Abdullah, Datuk Sheikh, and then eventually in the 1980s, there was Ramah Ram. Throughout his career, Ahmad Nawab composed over 2,000 songs sung by local and international artists. Enter Malaysia Truly Asia in November 1999. So Ahmad Nawab was approached by Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture to compose a song for the country's tourism campaign titled Malaysia Truly Asia. What was the task? To compose a song to fit lyrics that was provided to him while at the same time incorporating musical elements from various cultural groups. So he communicated and contacted Khadijah Ibrahim, whom he personally thought was the most suitable to sing the song. The song lyrics were written and sung in English for the global campaign. It was eventually translated into 17 languages. The song was performed by an orchestra of 50 musicians, and Ahmad Nawab himself flew to each of the 17 countries to coach the singers. It was sang in Cantonese, there was Mandarin, Japanese, Dutch, Hindi, Tamil, Russian, and so on and so forth. All right, so these are some of the literature I found on Malaysia Truly Asia, only some of them. So one of the scholars actually mentioned the fact that Malaysia Truly Asia campaign consisted of a series of advertisements, print and television that carried messages that not only is all of Asia represented in Malaysia, but also that Malaysia is truly Asia. Another scholar noted how Malaysia was only represented by female ambassadors with uniformly light skin and almost interchangeable faces. There's difficulty in representing Malaysia as truly Asia because of the varying ideas of what nation really is. And so there's a lot of contestation as to how Malaysia is actually truly Asia in a lot of these literatures, which I can discuss later in question and answers if time permits. Now, this is where I'm coming from in the chapter actually. I want to talk about Ahmad Nawab's past. He came from a colorful background in cosmopolitan and multi-ethnic society in Penang in the 1930s. It was a hub for the combination of pop culture, which is the result of the confluence of a myriad of cultural influences. There was music everywhere. He was exposed to the diverse tradition of musical performances in Penang's amusement parks. This is Fun and Frolic. There was Wembley. There was New World. He was a part of it. Within these parks, there was Bangsawan, there was a Ronggeng, there was Joyride Cars, there was dance halls, there were films, there was all these things, all infused together. Then, of course, we were talking about Nusantara, the inclusion of various ethnic and cultural elements into the song, which I hope to be able to play later for you, is a manifestation of shared cultural heritage, not just in the psyche of the songwriter, but exhibited through the eventual mass acceptance of this song. It became a reflection of a collective phenomenon. Malaysia has always been located within the Malay archipelago since the pre-colonial period. The Malay world exhibits wide-ranging ethnic, linguistic, and cultural variation. This is the result of the region being an heir to the Hindu, Buddhist, and Islamic traditions. Also, to 3 European colonial systems government, them being British, Dutch, and the French. Evolution of the polities of governance of the Malay world is a result of a complex multilinear embedization process. Each new culture and civilization that arrives is laid on top of the previous one, reinventing and reconstructing it to suit the needs of the day. The pre-colonial era of the Malay world was characterized by a plurality of cultures. It signified free-flowing natural processes, not only articulated through migration, but also cultural borrowings and adaptations. So, the contemporary identity that we see today is a result of the impact of layers of embedization originating from its pre-colonial civilization cultures within the archipelago. Regardless of the frequency of any nation branding campaign, the symbols invented and mobilized for the purpose of representing Malaysia as a modern nation will never be detached from a long and complex history of cultural borrowing and embeddedness of elements shared within the archipelago Nusantara. So for Malaysia Truly Asia, although the nation for Malaysia is still work in progress, the collective heritage will remain a representation for Malaysia, irrespective of whether or not the country is actually viewed as truly Asian. The survival of ethnic elements for a community rests on attitudes, sentiments, and perceptions that are embedded in the myths and symbols and values of society. Even if there are changes that are bound to occur over time, the importance of the collective myth and symbols as part of branding Malaysia will continue to live on and transcend time. So if I may, that's the end of my presentation. If I may request for Dr. Adil to help play the video for me, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Shazlin. And I'm really hoping that we get to talk a bit about branding, nationalism, and intangible cultural heritage at the end of our session. I think that'll tie so many things together. I want to take this time to move on to introduce our next speaker, who has been an integral part of this forum. Dr. Raja Iskandar Rajahali is an ethnomusicologist and senior lecturer at the Department of Heritage, Faculty of Creative Technology and Heritage, at University Malaysia Kelantan, where he has been a faculty member since 2009. His research interests lie in the area of Malay performing arts, with a focus on court music, post-colonialism, Islam, and popular culture. And without further ado, I would love to hear the presentation of Dr. Rajesh Kanda.
All right. Thank you, Pat. Okay. I have to share my presentation. Okay, can you see my presentation, Pat? Okay. In the chapter, I look into the Muslim concept of hijrah, which has multiple meanings and connotations. It goes beyond a simple idea of physical human migration from one place to another to include the metaphorical idea of the spiritual migration. How does hijrah, both in the physical and spiritual sense, relate to the phenomenal rise and popularity of nasheed contemporary, a genre which became part of the mainstream popular music in Malaysia during the 1990s and 2000s? We shall look at the individuals and groups involved and musical genres' multifaceted relation to the social and political dynamics prior and during the period, both locally and globally. Hijrah, also known as hijrah is an Arabic term that literally means to abandon or to break ties with someone or to migrate. It refers primarily to Prophet Muhammad's migration from Mecca to Medina in 622 AD. It marked the start of the Muslim calendar in 639 AD, initiated by Caliph Umar al-Khattab, the second Caliph of Islam. The term may be physical, non-physical, and metaphorical, and carries religious and secular connotation. For example, the word hijrah, penghijrahan. According to the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, the muhajir or immigrant is the one who abandons what God has forbidden. Hijrah also can be seen as a transition from accommodating state authority to resisting it. Islam was brought to the Malay world by Da'is, missionaries, Sufis, travelers from South Asia and the Middle East in the 13th century. The subsequent migration of Muslims also resulted in the introduction of performing arts such as the Nobat, Zapin, and Nasheed. The earliest Nasheed sung was during Prophet Muhammad's hijrah, when he was welcomed in Medina with the song Tala al-Badru alayna, or the moon has risen over us. The moon has risen over us. In Malaysia, Nasheed developed in 1940s to 1960s and performed in Musabaqah or Quran recitation competitions. Popular Nasheed groups began to emerge, such as Al-Jawahir, Al-Mizan from Singapore, Orkes Al-Suraya from Medan, Indonesia in the 1970s, and Nada Murni from Malaysia in the 1980s. These groups perform songs known as Irama Padang Pasir, using maqams commonly used in Quranic recitations. National Nasheed competition and festival were later organized by RTM and JAKIM of Malaysian Islamic Development Department. This is a group called Orkes Al-Suraya from Medan, well known throughout the Malay world in the 1970s, and this is the group from Al-Mizan from Singapore, and our Jawahir from Singapore was formed in 1979. And this is a popular song by Al-Mizan, Mari Sembahyang. Okay, we'd like to talk about the Da'wah movement. Islamic revival in Malaysia began in the 1970s and was influenced by what was happening socially and politically in the Middle East. Hassan al-Banna, Said Qutb from Ikhwan Muslimin, and ulama Abul Ala Maududi were some of the leaders and scholars that were looked up by and inspired movements such as ABIM and Jama'ah al-Tabligh. Usra and Halakah study group circles began to emerge. The founding members of ABIM included Anwar Ibrahim, Fadil Noor, and Ashari Muhammad. Later shaped the religious, political, and social landscape in the country. Apart from Islamic institutions were established in the state. The last 4 decades saw the rise of Islamic awareness throughout the country. In 1990, the state of Kelantan was governed again by Parti Islam Malaysia or PAS. It can be seen as a political hijrah by the people of Kelantan who wanted a more Islamic government. The state was led by a charismatic ulama named Ning Abdul Aziz. A new process of Islamization began. Activities such as seen as un-Islamic were gradually stopped or discouraged through legal or other means. Even traditional Mak Yong, Wayang Kulit, and Main Petri practitioners were banned from performing due to practice for certain rituals. This is a group of this is a nasyid group performing at a shopping mall in Kota Baru. Religious-based music and nasyid groups are encouraged as part of the state's agenda in Islamizing entertainment. Due to the restriction imposed by the state government, singers and musicians had to physically berhijrah or migrate to Kuala Lumpur for economic reasons. Nora from Kota Baru is one of them in the 1990s. Political changes in Kelantan in the 1990s coincided with the booming music industry in Kuala Lumpur, especially in the rock genre. Many Kelantanese-born musicians unable to perform in the state moved to Kuala Lumpur and managed to secure recording contracts. Many continued with their music careers in Kuala Lumpur. A number of them returned to Kelantan. A look at Darul Akram. It's a movement started by Ustaz Ashari Muhammad in the early 1970s, aimed to create an ideal self-sufficient Muslim community. It attracted highly educated Muslims, including singers and musicians who wanted to berhijrah and berdakwah or to spread the message of Islam. One of those attracted to Al-Akram was Farhin Abdul Fattah, a former punk rocker from Singapore. In an interview in 1997, Farhid said that he migrated to Kuala Lumpur to learn more about Islam and joined Adalah organization. This is a group write-up about plastic surgery, a group from Singapore. And you can see Farhin Abdul Fattah is one of the members in the middle there. Okay, we move to Raihan. Raihan was formed in 1996 and managed by Farhin Abdul Fattah after Nada Mudin was disbanded. Nada Mudin was a group from Arkam. Its members were Nazri Johani, a convert from Sabah, Cik Amra Idris, Abu Bakar Ahmad Yatim, Amra Ibrahim, and Azhari Ahmad. The group was known for its simple and catchy tunes accompanied by percussion instruments. Farhin believed in nurturing the young through Raihan's music, but the group's songs were well received by adults as well. The album Puji Pujian, produced by Farhin Abdul Fattah, distributed by Warner Music, sold 3.5 million albums worldwide and became the world's biggest nasyid group. This is a song, one of the most famous songs by Raihan, called Puji Pujian. And these are some of the other nasyid groups. Okay, nasyid contemporary craze swept throughout the country at a time when rock music was declining in popularity. Some pop and rock musicians began to explore new musical genres, including nasyid. For example, in Kelantan, a pop guitarist and rock bassist formed a group called Nasyid Orkes Sukma in 1998. Hamzan, second from that, he was the bassist for Zodiac, and later he became one of the members of a nasyid group called Nasyid Orkes Sukma in 1998. And nasyid was not only popular in Malaysia, but also was growing in other parts of the world. Among Muslim countries in Europe and the Middle East, well-known global artists in the nasyid genre included Sami Yusuf, Mahir Zain, Daud Wansbi, Zain Bika, and Yusuf Islam. Nasyid contemporary is also promoted by the state through IKIM and Malaysian Institute for Islamic Development. The genre now has its own charts and awards. This is a video of Anugerah Nasyid, organized by Jakim in 2017.
Dr. Raja, I'm afraid we can't see the video. Does Dr. Adil have the video?
Can you see the video now?
No, we cannot see the video.
Okay, it's okay. I move on to the next slide.
Okay. We can't see, we haven't been able to see your slides, but I'm hoping that when we get to the discussion, we can maybe go back over some of the slides.
Okay. You can see, can you see the slide?
No, we can't. We haven't been able to see the slides.
Okay. All right. I'll try to...
You know what we could do? Why don't you sum up, and then we'll send the video to Adil, and then we'll play it at the after the answer. Here we go. We have Spiritual Hijra that's up here. Cat Stevens. Now we can see.
Okay, we see. Yeah. All right. Okay. Okay. Like Farhin Abu Fatah and Wahab Yusuf, there are many other musicians who made the spiritual hijrah, or what was termed by Christine Dizzy as the Cat Stevens effect. It refers to Muslim musicians doing an 180-degree career change, either totally abandoning their career or choose different genre, usually spiritual or Islamic in nature, together with a change in physical outlook and image. These are some of the popular artists who made the hijrah, either quitting the industry or went into nasheed or religious themed music. And this is the Tok Guru effect, artists flocking for spiritual guidance and inspiration from the late Menteri Besar of Kelantan, Datuk Ni Abdul Aziz Nikmat, who was also the spiritual advisor to PAS, or the Islamic Party of Malaysia. Okay, in trying to further understand the spiritual hijrah, I met Mustafa Mat Daud, or popularly known as Tapai. He's a guitarist, songwriter, sound engineer, and producer, former guitarist of rock group Zodiac. He worked as a studio technician at Buddhist Boys in Kuala Lumpur in the 1990s. He worked with some of the biggest artists and producers in the country. This is Tapai's Facebook regarding his hijrah and the reasons behind his decision to return to Kelantan. Excerpt from his post are translated as follows. Hijrah, according to norms, life is like a wheel. You're on top for a moment and at the bottom sometimes. According to the Sharia, Islamic teachings, life is a temporary journey. Towards a different world, hijrah is a demand in striving towards goodness and Allah's blessings. In conclusion, Nasheed was first sung to welcome Prophet Muhammad's arrival in Medina during the hijrah from Mecca. There was political, economic, and spiritual hijrah of Muslims the past 4 decades in Malaysia, which was influenced by regional and global Islamic da'wah, social and political movements. There are demands for greater Islamization in social life, education, and politics, and this provided a germinating ground for an alternative form of music and entertainment. Nasheed groups from Singapore and Indonesia laid the foundation of popular nasheed in the region. It flourished during a time when popular musicians migrate for economic and spiritual reasons, including states like Kelantan, where there was a drastic change politically and socially due to change in government. Al-Akram became a successful da'wah movement that attracted followers, including those from the music industry, such as Farihin and Wahab Yusuf. State institutions such as the International Islamic University, Islamic Development Department of Malaysia, and Islamic Propagation Foundation of Malaysia helped in promoting nasheed and continues to provide a platform for economic and spiritual hijrah. The whole process of hijrah and the development of nasheed can be seen as authority-defined, everyday-defined social reality. It was influenced by both the state and organic nature of Malaysia's Muslim society's quest for change and also individual journeys towards spiritual and enlightenment and fulfillment. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Raja. And I think it's very fascinating that you're exploring this concept of hijrah. You note in your chapter as well that you've seen this within the performing arts communities in the traditional performing artists in Kelantan, yes, as well as in the popular artists. So I think it's really one of those themes that goes across the popular as well as the traditional. I've also heard sort of stories or narratives of hijrah as well. How do people redefine their performing arts practice as they begin to meditate on the akhirat, the life after our life here, right, in the world. So I really hope that we can kind of speak a bit more to this, because I think it's one of these key sort of local concepts that you see not just here in Malaysia, but also, of course, in Indonesia with a star of the caliber of, say, Roma Irama, who also has sort of this hijrah theme that goes through his work. Okay, so without further ado, I want to take the time to introduce our next speaker, who's also from Indonesia. Chitra Aryandari was born in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. She received her PhD in Performance Arts and Visual Arts Studies from Gajah Mada University, Indonesia in 2012. Chitra is a lecturer at the Department of Ethnomusicology at the Indonesian Arts Institute of Yogyakarta, which is Institute Seni Indonesia, or ISI. She was a guest lecturer at the Musicology Department in Universiteit van Amsterdam, and her research interests include ethnomusicology, popular music, performance studies, cultural studies, urban culture and society, mythology, and visual anthropology. She's the author of a number of articles, documentary films, and books, and she's also founder and director of Chitra Research Center, CRC. Her works can be accessed through her personal website, www.chitraaryandari.com. We look forward to your presentation, Dr. Chitra.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Pat. Thank you for all. At this moment, I would like to share my work entitled The Indonesian Popular Music Industry, Navigating Shadows of Political and Cultural Uncertainty. This article started with the hectic Indonesian media discussing of draft law on music at the beginning of 2019. All media cover musicians who discuss it against the bill, which is not urgent for House of People representative and the government to discuss the bill into law. The bill is considered to have many problems that hinder the development of the creative process and repress music workers. The law regarding music in Indonesia has never been exposed. Perhaps even most musicians are not aware of this regulation. Maybe only the big agency, like a major label, understand the law, but although I'm not sure either. Therefore, it was bizarre and disturbing when suddenly the draft bill was made public. Not only do famous musicians have an opinion, but all residents also have an opinion. Who started it, how and why the bill became a hot topic in early 2019. Until now, no one knows the primary motive. For sure now, the discussion about the bill has disappeared and everything seems to be okay. In general, I see that there are several political eras in life in Indonesia. After I have studied the archive that exists in each period has a different perspective on music, especially in the popular music industry. How does the state respond to the creative work of musicians and vice versa? How the creativity of musicians respond to Indonesian social politics condition? In this chapter, I discuss the changing political that overshadow the life of the popular music industry in Indonesia. The constellation of music and politics in every era in Indonesia are very complex. However, the patterns are transparent when the history is read diachronically. The colonial era was the embryo of the Indonesian industry of music entertainment. Jan Polsky reported between 1903 until 1917 that Odeon produced 2,614 singles, while Bintang Sapu and Gramophone produced more than 2,000 singles. It shows how massive the music industry had become in the era. In the colonial period, the national anthem, Indonesia Raya, which was able to burn the spirit of nationalism, was considered dangerous of the powerful colony. However, the emergence of the record industry throughout the world made the distribution of national anthem and local song undeniable. In the Old Order era, the search for identity in a newly constructed ideology became the reason for banning global or Western taste music. America and the West are considered inconsistent with Pancasila and Nasakom, or National Communists, like that. The search for Indonesia identity forms is deadlocked, and then the multicultural concept as a wise middle ground. Unparalleled with the old one, the new order tried to open the veil by accepting Western and American culture. As a result, the hybrid music industry became an option to embrace the region with a global goal for a nation. However, media at that time, TVRI and RRI, are used as a mouthpiece for government to lead mass opinion. Thus, musicians who are not in line with the government cannot enter TVRI and RRI. The fall of President Suharto in 1998 was a new era in Indonesia. The transition of the centralization system toward decentralization made the music industry change. The Indonesian music industry, in a new order monopolized by the major label, then changed with the emergence of the indie labels. The Reformation era offered freedom and regional autonomy that made the music known to the broader community with national and regional industries growth. Lastly, starting from a phenomenon that looks striking in 2014 presidential election, music becomes a universal language capable of mobilizing the masses. The attachment of music and the industry surrounding music not only present as an entertainment, but music can be a messenger and spearhead escort to Indonesian as a nation. The patterns show how the music industry in Indonesia is always in the shadow of the dynamic of Indonesian politics. There is no way out of this. The dynamic of Indonesian music industry is the same coin of understanding the dynamic Indonesian politics. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chitra. And as we're seeing, we're emerging emerge from just the discussion of our few panelists, the issue of politics and the influence of politics in each nation in Nusantara and politics in the arts is really something that I think we can explore a bit more in our roundtable discussion. So I hope that we can kind of start talking across the papers about that subject and that topic. So this law, I think that was written about, I'm guessing that is it correct that it was not implemented, it was just proposed, or did it actually pass in Indonesia? The law to limit
Yeah,
the, it was proposed, but it hasn't yet passed, right?
No.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you so much for your presentation. And I look forward to hearing more about censorship in the arts in Indonesia. I would like to take the time now to introduce our last panelist. We have Azmil Yusuf at Azmil Yunor, who's a bilingual Malaysian singer-songwriter, a musician, a producer, a gig organizer, and an academic in the field of film and media studies. His observation on the cultural politics of contemporary Malaysia sees him diverge from his artist peers in the Malaysian music scene, especially through his own published work on moral panic and heavy metal youth in 1990s Malaysia, and his regular column on performing arts and media in the Voices section of the news website, The Malaysian Insight. He is also, since 2020, he's been a member of Cendana's Industry Advisor panel. So he actually is quite linked in with Cendana, who is one of the sponsors of this conference. So please do let us know about your work. I'm really interested to hear your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum. Apa khabar Ipoh? Semua sihat Alright. Jadi so today I'm going to talk about KL Sing Song. And it's a chapter that that's in the book. Okay, you can check it out. Alright. So KL Sing Song was a singer-songwriter showcase that happened from 2005 to 2009, and this coincided dengan with all when indie rock became the in thing, and everything became sort of everybody became empowered after that. Yeah, so it's a very interesting period because it took me time to write about this, and you guys can check the chapter yourself. But this research essentially takes on a very self-reflexive approach. Yeah. So it's not really theory driven. It's really a bit of history and really about some insider network access. I think that's very important. But of course, also I think importantly, it's also a historical overview of the what you call a fostering of communal spirit, and networking. And this is kind of common in subcultures, right? And this is among like-minded practitioners, especially in this case in the early development of the singer-songwriter circuit in the early to mid 2000s. So this was a period when singer-songwriters were kind of odd pelik Nobody would have heard why you play solo. If you play solo, you play in a bar, play covers, Hotel California, and stuff like that. So the difference was that in the mid to 2000s onwards, a lot the performers, organizers leverage on their subcultural networking. So a lot of guys who started off organizing also in the 2000s at least were from the underground. And a lot of knowledge came also, and experience and networking came outside of the mainstream Malaysian music industry. I think that's quite important to emphasize because a lot of the conversation, I think, about the Nusantara tends to be top down, or at least in the status quo. All right, without considering, I think, voices in the margins, right, the alternative voices. So this chapter was also a proactive attempt to fill the gaps, in the broader narrative of contemporary Malaysian music making and Malaysian music history. This is the underground, the subculture, the margins are often forgotten, not part of the official history. Any Malaysian music book, mostly if you read, it's not there. Because it often bypasses a lot of historical and subcultural context outside what I would call the music industry in Malaysia is very insular. All right, it's very concerned about its own well-being. And we also have to problematize the music industry because the music industry in Malaysia has become increasingly a very Malay-centric music industry. Yeah, hence that's why we have a lot of scenes happening in especially minority groups. Even let's say in the Chinese language have started their own scene, and some of them fly off to Taiwan and stuff. Yeah, so again, this insular music industry narrative is a common narrative, and also often marked by a sense of sadness, and also the fact that it peaked at certain points. It's like the best has been done, and now it's all terrible, and I think we saw a bit of that conversation early on. And this is problematic because this golden era approach is a bit overrated, I feel, okay, and does very little to credit music makers in the here and now. All right, macam Ipoh is a happening place, man, in terms of music. All right, and a lot of good friends there. Okay, and organizers too. So we must avoid nostalgia. So this is me reminding myself also that this is very important. Yeah, and also a lot of data coming, let's say, from officials tends to overemphasize economic data, and this overshadows the holistic and historical understanding of development of popular music culture and its current state and perpetual what you call malaise, all right, in Malaysia. All right, sorry, the slides are a bit lagging, yeah, don't worry, I'll tell you the story as I'm talking. There's a lot of photos, by the way, in the slide, don't worry. So but we must also, I'm quoting Lockhart here, 1998, yeah, Craig Lockhart's book, Dance of Life. So he ends his chapter on Malaysia by ending it with a kind of grim note, saying that there's no real political voices. So political here in the sense like not necessarily party politics, because in Malaysia when we talk party politics, musicians disengage when the word politics appear. Because Lockhart also states that to understand popular culture, we understand that popular culture is a product of social processes and cannot be separated from society and politics and the time period which exists. So this time period is very important, yeah, when we're talking about the Malaysian indie music, sort of, people call it the rise of indie in the 2000s, although the history of the singer-songwriters is often forgotten. Of course, sustainability and all these things is very important, okay, in a lot of the cases of this, yeah. So what happened in the singer-songwriter scene is that a lot of the singer-songwriters who emerged and the organizers came from the punk scene. There were some individuals from outside who came back from overseas, and so it started really being very practical. Why solo singer-songwriter? It's easy to approach venues to ask, let's say, want to do a gig, and you might not have a big backline, and you're not part of subculture. You don't have bands, and a lot of singer-songwriters tend to be frustrated band members, because the narrative as usual, people get busy or continue studies and stuff. So KL Sing Song, for example, was started, and this is three of us here. Myself, Jerome Kugan, who's from Sabah, by the way, and Tan Sehon. So very truly Asia picture of Malaysia. Only gender is just diversity could be better, but this is what as things happens, you don't plan this thing. It's not a public relations exercise. So Jerome Coogan and Tan Sehon actually got funding to do the first Kelsing song. I was a participant. I wasn't involved in organizing it, but I organized a show that preceded it. So the three of us essentially we created a company called Troubadours to be taken more seriously, and eventually we got funding from the ministry, and we started organizing the first Kelsing song. All right. So the first Kelsing song was the first one was in 2005, which Sehon and Jerome organized. That was at ICOM, and that was they got the funding from Artsy, Artsy.network Asia, and it was a dialogue and workshop, as you can see here. So very diverse. We had Opi Andaresta from Indonesia. We had Mio, okay, Perak, anak Perak, and a lot of public. There was Q&A. There's Pete Teo. We had June from Thailand, and we're supposed to have a guest from Philippines, but she couldn't make it last minute when she realized her passport had expired. So it was a dialogue and workshop, pretty much the first one. But we also did a showcase at Alexis Music, as you can see here, the venue here. This had Kelvin Tan from Singapore also. He was one of the members of the workshop and the panel, yeah. Mia Palencia here performing, and this is Reza, okay. So the first Kelsey song had this show at night, so that's kind of separate. But when we got funding from the government, we organized this KL Song 2006 as part of the KL Festival. So we moved to KL PAC, KL Performing Arts Center. And we were there from 2006, 2007, 2008 for 3 years. And we managed to just use that funding from 2006, but also we produced this compilation, a double CD. And it's still the only document of singer-songwriters from that period, okay? Again, but it's quite diverse voices. So you have different performers from Kelsing Song, including Shen and Shah here, okay? So this period was very, what you call, very healthy. We learned a lot of things, and we also saw networking from the underground and stuff. So I'll just end it there. We're running out of time, yeah? But just to give you a sense of what was happening outside of the you could say the official narrative. Bands were happening too. There were a lot of indie bands making it, and there was X-Fresh FM and all this stuff going on. But you can see here the audiences were pretty big for a singer-songwriter. So slowly we collaborated with a lot of artists for the posters and stuff. But yeah, so it ended at 2009 at Annex Gallery in KL, which was a very strong hub of the scene leading up to 2008 election. So I think we'll talk about the politics later, Patricia. I think that was a big part of what went on with this, because alternative voices, very inclusive, and it was an interesting time indeed. So, you know, just giving props to the era, because nobody writes about this, and being a witness to that, I thought I wanted to share this in this book. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And indeed, I do hope that we can talk about politics. Politics, not just in terms of how do we define spaces and places, but politics also in terms of what voices you hear, which voices are emphasized, how things are presented, how culture is branded, how people subvert those brands, which I think you've written on in terms of your work on the long-haired rockers, right? So I think that we'll have quite a bit to talk about, and I really do find your work interesting. And also, it's very refreshing to hear from somebody who's actively engaged as a participant in the industry itself. You get kind of that EMIC perspective. If I may, I'd like to take this time to kind of open our discussion. We've heard a bit from each of our authors in the book, and if I can, I'd like to invite Port of Ipoh to kind of put everybody up. And I'm going to just kind of throw an opening question out for the roundtable. Throughout our symposium, we've been speaking about the concept of Nusantara. Nusa can often be defined as island or Tanah Air, a homeland. As you note in the introduction of Made in Nusantara, the term was developed during the period of the Majapahit to refer to the island of Java, and Antara, the outlying islands under the control of the Majapahit Empire. So we have that concept of center and periphery. How do we now define this concept of Nusantara? And why is this understanding of the interconnected history of the countries of the Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore, and Malaysia important to the study of popular music in this region? And perhaps we can begin with Adil or Mako, because this is really something that you use to kind of introduce the book. But I think it's also important because even how we define this concept of Nusantara and who we include in it is often a political one. So who would
Right.
like?
I mean, maybe thanks so much, Pat, also for your wonderful moderation of this massive roundtable. And thank you, everyone, also for your contributions. Of course, the first major question would be the kind of defining scope of what is Nusantara and what isn't. And I think it's wonderful that we're taking this a political view into how that fits into the conversation of what is included or excluded from what is the Nusantara. Now, of course, Michael and I set out to edit the book with a very inclusive approach. In fact, the very selection of the term, you could say, is a bit political, right? The selection of the term Nusantara to encapsulate the musical cases that we wanted was, in a way, a kind of political move. It was an inclusivist one. Because the term Nusantara for us, and as we elaborate also in the introductory chapter, is actually a step to decolonize this idea of the Malay world and the region, and to also question and challenge nation-state boundaries. And we find that through observing popular music and performing arts in general, of course, our focus now is popular music, you see that these boundaries are really disintegrating, you know, especially when we talk about the diversity of genres, styles, and practices that intersect. Michael gave a wonderful kind of conceptual introduction on how you have this kind of praxis of indigeneity and also popular music that comes from global influences, but they're also very like locally, intrinsically local expressions, you know, that take on different forms of music from different parts of the world, be it global or, you know, global or internal, you know. And I think we're probably going to elaborate on this a bit more, is this politics. What I'm noticing, maybe something that I want to raise also, and I've sat in a few presentation. I think Port Ipoh has done an amazing job. Thank you so much for like putting this together. But I've also noticed a trend in some of the presentations that I've seen that tend to be very focused on ke-Melayuan or Melayu and Malaysia. But of course, I mean, I understand the practicality. We are doing it in Malaysia. But I want to remind the audience that actually we have to think about these cross-border relationships. There was some talk about nationalizing or, you know, like making Malaysian popular music heritage, intangible cultural heritage. Now, I think that's a bit problematic, to be very honest lah, sejujurnya, because, you know, Malaysian popular music is very diverse and it reaches out to many different things. So once you start to put that national label, you might actually inhibit the true creative potential of that art. I think I just want to leave it at that, maybe just to chocho a bit, yeah, some of the issues that are coming out. But thank you, Pat, for that question. I hope we can pass it on to the rest of the team.
Sure, perhaps we have some of our Indonesian panelists who might want to answer about the concept of Nusantara and the book and this idea of cultural exchange across borders. Maybe in terms of, I don't know, dangdut or even...
Yeah,
no?
I think that I will try to answer it.
Okay.
It means like the Nusantara, there is like an exchange there, and then in dangdut, I think that the emerge of dangdut, I think there is Indian music there is a Melayu music there, and then there is like a Arabic music there, and then they brought together there, and then in this book, I think that the Nusantara, the book would like to show how the Nusantara right now, the condition, the constellation right now. So that's why, like, okay, in my part in dangdut, my chapter dangdut, I'm trying to show you how the dangdut grow and then the develop with the brought together like in Nusantara typical. So there's like exchange there. I just that it's my answer. Thank you.
Okay, great. The other thing that I noticed in your chapter, and it was something that was sort of sublimated maybe, or maybe below the surface, but I sort of picked it up. We have Roma Irama, who is a sort of icon of Dandut, right? Who's also supported by one political party. And then at the time of the Reformasi, you have the rise of female power in Inul, right? And you have this embodiment of sort of female sexual power with the goyang Inul and the drilling. And I remember this is right when the time when I was first introduced to the region. So I would, we would all sit and watch the VCDs of Inul, and everyone was very fascinated with this idea of, wow, she's really doing that, right? And the goyang Inul was just the craze. But what kind of there was a real reaction from Roma Irama regarding that as sort of well, I think the term used was pornographic or vulgar, right? So you have, in a sense as well, this kind of female agency embodying kind of the sense of reformasi, but then you also have kind of that sort of masculine power of Roma Irama, who's kind of embodying sort of the values of the previous administration. Do you see any of that, of like the politics at all? Or maybe perhaps you could speak to the concept of hijra as well with Dandut? I'm just trying to tie things together across the papers.
Yeah, sure. I think that Roma Irama, he create not only the Dangdut, but he create the PAMI, like the organization of Melayu musician of Indonesia. And then like he tried to construct what is the good of the Dangdut. There's like a polite dance, and then the lyric is really is lyric clean. It's not seronok. There's no seronok there. And then I think that Roma tried to construct the Dangdut, and then try to put the, like you said, hijrah things, because in my opinion, Roma Irama is he is a living legend, and then but he is when he created the Orkes Melayu Soneta in 1971, I think that the jargon or the principle is the voice of Muslim, so that's why he tried to put the voice of Muslim in Dangdut. So, and then in 2003 there is like a contestation, and then after the new order, the Order Baru after the Soeharto era, and then there is like the discourse about the decentralization. So that's why I think that there is like a Dangdut era there, and then fought each other. But I think that it's only in my opinion, it's only just a relation and economic things behind that. Because in East Java, I think Dangdut Koplo is annual event in every event. I think that if there is a marriage, I think there is a Dangdut. If there is like a Independence Day, there is a Dangdut. There is after the Idul Fitri, I think that there is a Dangdut. So I think Dangdut is so grounded in the society. And then when we talk about the central Jakarta and the daerah and the regional things, and there's like contestation that, in this opinion. Thank you.
So it's a political contestation of time, right? But also of place. So you have center and periphery, or local versus national. That's very interesting. I would love to be able to kind of see if we can get Shazlin and Chitra to kind of speak to one another about nationalism and branding and nation state and ideals about music and presentation. The Malaysia Truly Asia case, I'm rather familiar with, and it kind of resonates with me because it was a time that I was here in Malaysia when I first arrived. But there have been critiques, as you note, of this sort of almost tourist campaign to kind of commercially brand the nation to itself. I'm kind of wondering, like, how can we think of that in terms of what Chitra presented in terms of sort of restrictions or proposed restrictions on popular music in Indonesia? Are there also attempts, I remember the Trumpersari and also these contemporary sort of creations in Indonesia. There have been attempts to kind of have the state choreograph performances as well in Indonesia, usually with the palace arts being chosen as the things to represent Indonesia as nation. But what do you see anything in terms of branding, or Shazlin, do you see anything in terms of restrictions in Malaysia? I don't know. Maybe you guys can speak a bit to one another.
Okay, maybe I will answer first. Okay, regarding what Michael said about the decentralization when the Reformation era, that's a lot of things happen in Indonesia related to the popular music industry. There is a lot of indie labels came to in the small regions, and also not just in Jakarta, and also a lot of female artists came to Jakarta, hijrah to Jakarta. And this is become a hot issues actually. Also, this is related also about the politics at that time, that masculinity powers is still what is kind of like related to the nations, and also Islamic power also become powerful in Indonesia. This is also become issues that they would like to repress the mobility of the female to the central. So this is like when the 2019, at the beginning 2019, there is a draft law about the music. Before that, we don't know about the draft about the law of music. Actually, we never know about this and never exposed about that things. But after a lot of things about the women on the public space, that I think this is a lot of restriction. But actually, this is just like a political issues, but for a while. But after that, is everything be okay? like now. So this is just like an issues like that in Indonesia.
I think that image of women and representation is really interesting, and I think that reflects something that Shazlin was speaking about in her paper. Right. Maybe Shazlin can comment about women and branding and nation in Malaysia, truly Asia.
Yes, the thing is, with Malaysia, anything with regards to branding is always top down. It is always authority defined. It is always determined by the government of the day. And that does not entirely mean it is always intelligent. Because, and it always gets confused because what Malaysia Truly Asia is actually a tourism effort. So when it's a tourism effort, ultimately the ultimate aim of the entire campaign is for profit. Okay, then comes all the confusion about what you want to put as symbols for what as attraction for what you want people to see. Now, when you want to have images for the country, who are your audience? Do you want the people is it an internal audience, or is it supposed to be international audience? Okay, so then you have all this mixed up together. If you have a specific department to advise the government as to what this is supposed to be, then I would think that the end result would turn out better, because they had a lot of money and it was really massive. So what happened was, when Ahmad Nawab shared with me, was that he already had lyrics. So if you actually see the lyrics to Malaysia Truly Asia, it really means nothing. Malaysia Truly Asia has lyrics that means nothing if you actually listen to it. Okay, So Ahmad Nawab had to do something out of lyrics that means nothing, and he had to come up with something that has to include every other race, every other ethnicity in the country. So that in itself explains how it came from. It's just a body that wanted so much because they had a lot of money for the campaign.
But then this brings up a really interesting question about sponsorship, commodification, and patronage in the arts, and who is the patron, and how these forms are being developed. So I'm kind of wondering, does anybody want to speak to this issue of commodification or patronage in the arts in Malaysia, or in popular music in Malaysia?
I think that's
Or
important.
reactions against it?
Yeah. No, I think it's important. The economics of music making, you can't deny. I mean, even the underground, we've got underground economy, you sell merch. But I see that sensibility not moving into now the current indie musicians who just share their Spotify, they viral it and hoping to get some big gig. So they're not rolling things. So that the commodification has changed now, definitely. But we talk about the Nusantara, I think we've got a lot to learn from each other. You know, I think in the case of good question there, because like when we did Kelsing song, of course we got that one funding from the government for only 2006, by the way. But because we've got this underground way of understanding of leveraging and stretching your money, we use that one funding for the next few Kelsing songs because we would, you know, with ticket and merch, we roll that. So that sense, I think, is important. Patronage is important, but not dependent all the time, I think. Of course, over here, the understanding is you get patronage, then you will kowtow to the whoever's giving the patronage, right? So, but that's not always the case. I think that a lot of Malaysians self-censor themselves, and that's a problem. You won't get any genuine voices. So that's, I think, in relation to singer-songwriters, they have a certain agency in terms of creating bodies or merchandise to carry on. But as individuals, I think I'm just wanting to make a point here about singer-songwriters is that singer-songwriters have an agency that bands don't have. And this is where I think, because I just came out a project with some Indonesian singer-songwriters and Singaporean Art Fazil recently. And we did this song, which is a country folk English, you know, it's a Western musical form. The lyrics was English, but the whole message is actually Nusantara. So, you know, we won't fit into the kind of Nusantara we've been having conversations, I think, mostly in this symposium, right? Which is very Melayu-centric idea of what Nusantara is. Whereas if you tour Indonesia, so me and another friend, we've been touring 2 years before the pandemic, was primarily to really see for ourselves what is this Nusantara, and there was great love and there's great empathy, and that's you don't see that when we hear the official discourse of Nusantara in Malaysia. I find that problematic because it is not inclusive for one. Because so like we never bring Philippines into the conversation, talk about Nusantara. So is it about religion? Thailand probably language, and of course religion is very different. So that's, I think, the ethno-nationalist tendency of associating the Nusantara. You got to always contest that, or else it's nice for people in power to have that, and have complete control over people. Nusantara, like wearing the ring, Nusantara ring, whatever lah. So, but I think that's important. I mean, I just want to link that with the whole culture, right? Of if you tour, you've got merchandise, you're creating commodities, you're running shows, and of course at the same time you might find patronage, potential sponsors, So yeah, or have a day job lah. Patron yourself, yeah.
But that tour question also brings us to mobility, and it brings us to Perantau, and it brings us to Hijrah, and it brings us to the concept of travel, and travel inextricably linked with the concept of Nusantara, which is not just Tanah, but it's Tanah Air, land and water. So I'm wondering if we might want to speak a bit to physical as well as musical or spiritual mobilities. And
yeah, I mean,
yeah, go ahead, Dr. Raja,
Yeah.
then Chitra.
Yeah, all right. Thanks. I mean, in relation to what Azmi was talking about power, yeah, we can see that also in Nasheed, where the Islamic organization, like Jakim, Hikim, they took advantage of the popularity of Nasheed, and they sponsor them. It's like kind of like patronage of Nasheed. Seemed like an ideal kind of art form, and money was given to the Nasheed industry. Even like they have festivals, and they have even Nasheed awards and everything, and even they have specific TV channels for Nasheed programs. So this is kind of like is a kind of a power play in the socio-religious political thing going on. And the same goes with Kelantan. What happened in 1990, and after the takeover of the Kelantan government by PAS, and I can see all the changes, Islamization. So the power or the government, they are trying to create the kind of ideal society, and music played along well with these. What do you call it? Maybe what do you call like a change, or like they would like a top-down change of culture, of your musical preference. So this is kind of very interesting, and also in relation to what Patricia was saying, the mobility. I mean, it has happened for generations, for centuries. People are going around. Mobility. We were very mobile in the area called Nusantara. So that's where music, even like Nasheed itself, the influence of Nasheed, it is cross boundary, not just from the Middle East to this part of the world, but among between Indonesia and Malaysia, if you want to use the term nation states, you can see like all this mobility going around from starting from the Middle East. They came back and as serving at the Ustads. From this Ustad from Sumatra, moved to Sabah, moved to Kuala Lumpur. So you can see all this mobility, and also of course the spiritual mobility, the hijrah, of course. So it's kind of like it has both spiritual, the physical dynamics and political dynamics intertwined in the idea of musical mobility, which is to me is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Anyone cares to follow up? Yeah.
I want to concur you,
Yeah,
Raja, because as musician who tours on my own, it's a spiritual thing. I'm not being facetious. Yeah, it is true, right? As a Muslim touring, one with the land, crossing boundaries. I think it's a duty of any musician who calls themselves Nusantara to tour. Don't just sit in your own nation state and call yourself Nusantara. I think you got to go out, engage, then you understand, then you pick up, right? That's how you get a hybridity, I think. But
yeah.
Thank you. I think that hijrah concept is so important, actually. Yeah.
Okay, I add Saslin about the Malaysian Truly Asia. Actually, I saw that the government of Indonesia, both Indonesian and Malaysia, have a same perception about thinking about the Nusantara. Like when Indonesia talking about the wonderful Indonesia, also put all the music together in one form. Also, like when I saw the Malaysia Truly Asia, put all the thing is same on the same packagings like that. I think this is how we saw about the Nusantara. This is like we cannot separate every island, or so we need to put all the things together like that. So I think this is how we see about the Nusantara.
So sort of like the way it's culturally packaged, right? Shazlin, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah. But whether or not we are actually celebrating everyone, or whether we are actually killing it, because but then there's also the problem of excluding some. Who decides as to who gets included? That would be the problem, right? Because if it is top down, then I see the powers that be would determine who gets to be included, and then of course those in the periphery would be left out, and then we will never know who they will be. So yeah, that would be a question that we would forever not know the answer to.
I think it will always be a top-down, and there's always be a top-down thing. I mean, considering Southeast Asia has been ruled by so-called, dictatorship and everything, or dictator-like governments. I mean, we can't run away from being dictated upon in terms of, almost everything in our lives, including music. So yeah, I mean, this discourse about power, about agency and everything, I mean, it has to go both ways. But we can see both the dynamics of power and also the agency of the people. I mean, it goes both ways.
Yeah,
this kind of yeah.
Yeah, the Nusantara is almost is a response, I think, to that top down. We're very aware of our subordination. Like it's not so much like fight and resist. Find ways. Like weapons of the weak. So we find ways to kind of like find cracks, and that's a greater victory than something that you go out in public and show off. It's so true. Our understanding is power in Nusantara. I think that makes us different or very peculiar.
Yeah, perhaps, sorry to jump in, that's maybe something to highlight, because I think the term itself, Nusantara, is something that doesn't just belong to, some exclusive, set of academics or whoever, it is that is basically naming or conceptualizing the region. But a lot of musicians themselves use the term to conceptualize the music that they do using this idea of the Nusantara. So I remember when we did the interview with Raja with Dato M. Nasir, he was talking about this idea of nuansa Nusantara, this idea of trying to look at specific musical elements from the region into, for his compositions and the way he's developing his own material. So, and I kind of like that, because in a way, each person can participate in this discussion and conceptualize it the way they see it from their own experience in that sense. That's why I think in the book we were talking not necessarily about a Muzik Nusantara, but actually a Nusantara experience, and those experiences are quite diverse, depending of the training and where the musicians are in general.
It's dangerous because what you call this in promoting yourself as with identity becomes identity politics. That's one thing, but there's also danger of us self-exoticizing ourselves to the world. I think that's where, like, if you're commercial and you're satire, you got to find something that sounds like you're from there. That's why, like, singer-songwriters, they're all Western forms, so it's nothing unique. Cannot sell. I think that's why it happens. Interesting. Yeah.
I mean, if I may, I think there are instances, Asmil, of a bit of both, right? I think there is this kind of push on the global stage. Like the book also talks about Nusantara musicians reaching out beyond the borders of the Nusantara. There are cases actually of Nusantara musicians, and also that are playing Western forms of music, for example, right? Popular forms of music that are not intrinsically considered traditional or local or folk to the region, that are really also bringing a different kind of aesthetic or sensibility or presence, at least. And of course, like the other way that I think about the Nusantara musically, then, I mean, aside from politically, like what Michael has raised, actually, is this, it's a kind of like an aesthetic and cultural resource as well, like how Dato M. Nasir does it, is drawing, is taking like different resources of music, of aesthetics, and putting it in, whether that is ethically, right, questionable, right? And is there appropriation involved when if you are an artist from the Nusantara, there are also questions of ethnicity, race, indigeneity, national identity that come into play over the appropriateness or the ethics of drawing from these resources. For example, Dato M. Nasir is, he was born a Singaporean citizen, but the source of his, success has been the Malaysian music market. Right, and I think some people also kind of like that identity, the identity fluidity becomes also very unclear for some people. And I think some people actually see Dato' M. Nasir, let's just take him as an example, as a Malaysian national music icon.
Yep.
But then, of course, he has become a citizen, but there's this complex history of different exchanges. But I think this might lead pretty well into a really good question that we received in the Facebook chat. I wonder if we could maybe display that. All right.
Okay, so I'll read the question. This is from Professor Tan Subeng. Thank you everyone for the wonderful presentations. I have a question for the panel about the definition of Nusantara popular music. Would the pop music created by other ethnic groups in other languages, like the Chinese and Indians, be considered made in Nusantara? After all, these songs are composed by people who are born and live in Nusantara, and some of them are famous globally. Thanks, Asmiel, for raising the KL indie scene.
Interesting question. Very bottom.
Who would like to address the question?
I'm happy to go first. There is thank you very much, Professor Tan Swee-Beng. That is such an important question, but I also maybe want to clarify that the Made in Nusantara book, yes, we are taking a very inclusivist approach to Nusantara and who falls within that. But the project of Made in Nusantara doesn't end with the book. There are definitely limitations to the coverage of what, and we regret, but at the same time, there are also limitations to what is being covered. But we did endeavor to the best of our ability to have a kind of inclusive notion of who counts as Nusantara. So some examples, maybe I can just quickly list who are I think what you're implying, Prof. Tan, is that non-Malay, non-ethnic Malay, I think, because we're maybe early on we're talking about in the context of Malaysia and Indonesia and Malay identity. In the context of Malaysia, in the context of the Philippines, for example, we touch on Borromeo Lu, who is an important contributor to the Vodavil or the Vodavil. I wish our Philippine friends were here for this conversation, but that would require a lot more time, of course. We probably need a few round tables to get all the issues covered. But we focus on people so Borromeo Lu is considered to be of Chinese descent in the Philippines as well, and he was very early on, he traveled the United States and brought a form of vaudeville and that became indigenized in the Philippines called Vodavil. Right. Another example I draw from also is the late great Paul Ponadure, who is ethnic Indian Malaysian, who was one of the most established instrumental musicians in the performing. He performed in Singapore. He's a guitarist and singer. Of course, there's issues of not recognizing as well people from the Nusantara space that may not necessarily fit the ethnic type of the top-down definition of what is that nationality. What counts as Nusantara? So people like Paul Ponadure, even though he experienced relative success in Singapore and a lot of international artists would come and see him, he probably didn't get or didn't seek even the support that other artists would have had. Maybe this is an issue that we can debate. If you are a certain ethnicity a musician of a certain ethnicity in a country within the Nusantara, do you get certain privileges in terms of government support, for example, in promoting your music? So these are difficult and maybe uneasy questions for some of us, but we are definitely doing our best to address this, and I hope that this is a continuous discussion that we'll have. And I'll leave it at there for now. Maybe someone else can pick up on what I'm saying.
Yeah, if you take Pocho Pocho as a song, right? It's something if you go on the ground and at the grassroots, it's very popular. To me, that's a Nusantara song. I think if you can reduce something to that level where it's recognizable and it crosses, right? Pocho Pocho is Philippines, is it? And then and in Borneo is very popular, Sabah Sarawak, Indonesia. So I feel that's exactly what we're talking about power here, right? Because it's about ownership of this thing called Nusantara.com. Who owns that? So Baba Nyonyas, are they Nusantara? To me they are, but maybe that's up for debate, academically. It's important question that must be asked, yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Tansubeng or Professor Tansubeng also asks, so do they have to sing in Malay for it to be defined as Nusantara?
For me, no. I'm again. That's what I'm trying to push for. I don't think like when we had Kel sing song, wasn't when was Mandarin mix. There's even what you call Creole or street language. So no. I mean, if that's imposed lah. But exactly like I think Dr. Raja said, it's power and it's always a play with that. So they might impose. If you want Nusantara funding, must sing in Malay. Okay, so. And how many percent? You can cocok some more lah. Like our films, right? 70% has to be Malay to be called Malaysian film. So I don't know, music probably doesn't have that rule. But if that's the wrong way forward lah. If it's gonna be just in Malay to be considered Nusantara.
But yeah, to jump in, there's also the consideration of other ethnic groups and this idea of local scenes for popular music. I mean, we have a chapter by Connie on the development of Iban popular music in Sarawak that I think extends this conceptualization quite naturally. And the chapter by Bernard is talking about Sangbai, which can be considered a popular form among the Bajau in East Sabah and the southern Philippines. So I think it's more about the fluidity of the conceptualization of the term, but also the way we conceptualize popular music, because it's oftentimes we're looking at popular music as developed within the national industries of each of these countries, and when we also have sort of local, regional phenomena that are happening that I think we also need to look at in order kind of to conceptualize this sort of matrix of what's happening at the regional and the national level. So.
And there was just a little note by Professor Tansubeng that notes that non-Malay pop songs are often left out. But I think it is important that when we're thinking about local contexts, and I'm thinking about like the cassette industries of Indonesia from the 70s to the 90s, and the materials that you have coming out of Sumatra or Aceh or all the different regional languages. With Borneo, we have 60 plus ethnic groups and as many local languages, and there's pop music coming out in Kadazan, in Dusun, and Iban. But we don't, maybe beyond those localized scenes, it's very hard maybe to hear the cassette tapes of, Karo, Batak people in Java. I don't know. I mean, I know that there are some ethnomusicologists who go and try to buy up all the cassettes that they can because they're really interested in these regional musics. I guess the question I have to maybe some of you is, how do we, now we're in this age of streaming where everything's on YouTube. But how do we get those sort of very localized musical scenes more visibility?
Interesting. You have to be curious. Anyway, I do.
I think it's a tough one, right, Pat? Because with this so-called democratization that has been brought about by digital spaces for sharing and making music and all forms of media. I mean, number one is to use market terms, it's a saturated market. Number two is that getting eyeballs on screens or ears on streams, actually costs a lot of money. It's intensely capital intensive. I mean, from what I'm seeing from the popular music industry, even the so-called indie industry, is such a capital intensive endeavor to be heard and to be seen. And you're competing with a lot of different kinds of capital. I mean, like you have independent, like for example, Luncai Emas in Malaysia is technically indie, right? Dato' M. Nasir's label, but I mean, you guys are quite mainstream, right, in Malaysia, even though you're not universal and things like that. You have access. Luncai probably has access to certain funds that other smaller indies don't. And I'm sure that there are models like this in Indonesia and the Philippines as well. So this is how do we get out there? I mean, do we want to do it? The question is, do we want to get our music out there from a top-down initiative? Like a huge government funding the way that South Korea has with their industry. But then what kind of music do you get then, right, out of that? You get a kind of mass-produced, mass-marketed kind of music. So all these questions we have some people asking questions also about how do you make music sustainable, right? I mean, we also have to ask more questions about what you mean by that. What do you mean by what is sustainable, what is marketable, right? Like local industries, what are the recommendations for facing the challenge that the industry means? Well, first you have to define what you mean by sustainable. The nation state or the cultural authorities or the musicians themselves. I mean, Azmir and I, we play gigs for 10 people or less, but we're still playing gigs. So you could say that's sustainable, right? You know, somebody is doing experimental music in KL in Petaling Street and 2 people show up, but the gig is still going on, or maybe there's 10 people. So yes, maybe I'm going to pass that on to the rest of my mates. I get a bit excited about this, but
but yeah, it's happening. I think people are trying to always sustain things, right? But sometimes these people are trying to sustain, sometimes don't get the funds. I've heard a lot of that too, you know. They find the bureaucracy is so thick, you know, and it's very hard if you're not part of that larger official, like you said, like, you know, your company, or you need certain accounts. I know I'm not representing Cendana. I'm an advisor only, but you know, there's a need also in that case to show that you have a company, etc. So, but that's also to ensure transparency, right? That you're gonna deliver. So it's a catch-22. You know, money might be there, but you know, but the musicians wanting it at one access need to build this infrastructure that might be beyond them. So that's why sometimes they prefer to just stay in the underground, where it's a lot more, you know, people buy records in the underground. It's a lot more diverse. You want to ask about that, you go to commercial music stores, they probably all have the latest, you know, pop stuff. But I think that periphery is very important. So the underground is periphery to me. So
but I think we can, I think this ties in. I'm looking at Michael and I'm thinking very much about how I was first introduced to Ainul, and it was the VCD market, because it absolutely was not being put on television. And it was hot. I mean, I was watching it in the United States in my CIASI, you know, class, or after class when we all get together and cook. It'd be like, hey, did you see this? My friend just sent me from Indonesia. It's the VCD of Ainul. So I think she kind of began that sort of from the periphery, and she somehow managed to get, you know, the spotlight. So I'm wondering if Michael can talk a little bit about that in terms of Dandu.
Okay, sure. I think that the power of local industry, I think that the first is live performance, I guess. The live performance, I think that the powerful, you know, the powerful energy of to maintain the local industry, I think that. But if you talk about the Ainul things, I think that, yeah, we know the Ainul videos. I think that it is the private videos in the you know, someone marries, and then there's like the piracy there, and then distribute to other people there, and then that's the problem. But when I went to the East Java, I think that there were many merchants to, you know, to sell the VCD. But in my opinion, I think that there is a power of the local industry, because when the local society buy that, I think that it will be strengthen the local industry, I think. So that I don't have problem with the Ainul, because Ainul, I think that the dancing, the drilling dance, I think is a normal, but the video, how to take the video, I think that there's a problem that with that. I think that why the videographer just shoot the specific things, the specific view like that, I think that is problem. But I think that in the scene of Dangdut Koplo, I think that in East Java, it is normal. There are many right now. If we talk about Dangdut Koplo, I think that there's a Via Valen, Charisma, and Rata Antika, and so on. And so polite, there's no dance there. But when I went there, there are the singers who dance like that. But there's no problem with that, because it's you know, it means like the local industry has many Malay orchestra there, and then the society will choose which one better, which one what do you want to see, dance or the sing or just the new song or something like that. And it's the local industry is so diverse there, and then so that's why in my context, I think that if Jakarta doesn't spotlight the Dangdut Koplo is still alive there. They don't need Jakarta. in my opinion. So that's why.
Interesting. Yeah, Ninol got banned from Malaysia. She was supposed to perform here.
Oh,
Forgot
yeah?
What year it was. Yeah, she got banned here. They say it's not our typical lah. They say it's not our culture. What do you mean not culture? Nusantara. Betul. Kenapa kamu ban Nusantara? Yeah, betul. It's very important. Okay, we have a question. Oh, okay.
Okay, so this is a question from Rachel. I have a question for Asmil. Could you share with us about the KL sing-song scene with regards to Malaysia's political scene during that period?
Okay, when we started 2005, I mean, I started gigging early 2000s. It was you were in Mahathir and then Patlah. So it was you use that idea of like exactly what we spoke earlier about the power from top up. So you're always finding different ways. So I think that's how we got very inventive in the underground, because we're always aware of this power, and how do we navigate around that? We're so used to things like having special branch at your gig or something. For sure, there was a special branch at KL Sing Song, but definitely that time there was that sense. And I think that's why it was a lot more interdisciplinary. People from theater, filmmaker, visual arts will come to these gigs, these singer-songwriter shows that was happening around that time. There were places where you meet ideas, and people. I think that's often forgotten. The music venue spaces are not just spaces for music, spaces for political, social, romantic, cultural exchange, whatnot. Everything there, commerce, is all in one. So that question about sustainable also, I think, is important. I want to link it there, just a sense that, if people feel, they want to feel good, they go out and watch a show and they purchase something. So don't go for a free gig lah. That's simply put. But all I'm saying that politics at the time was that, and then came to 2008, and we had like first time the government lost majority. But leading up to 2008 and 2009, this is where Annex became quite a center, actually really, really happening, bustling subterranean space for not just artists, musicians. There was also like cafes, but this was like very underground style cafe, a music record store. So you had the intermingling happening between the different groups and marginalized groups. So there were like a lot of talks, etc. Whether it be sexuality, gender, etc., and also music. So definitely 2008 onwards, there was this excitement building actually in the politics, and that's why people were bolder. People kind of felt emboldened and felt like, hey, the system works. But at the same time, that's what I think people also saw, that there's opportunities to sell, and that's I think when Yuna came in. And ZRV got discovered, and people realized like, this is really cool, and corporations start look, hey, yeah, singer, but it needed that, yeah. So, but then you see the politics also going back to not as as incisive as it was, because people realized like, there's a model I need to follow. I need to be like Yuna or ZRV. So people started to kind of like reduce themselves for mass consumption. So, but at the same time, the political voices started disappearing again. But that really went down, I think, way years later when 2013, another election happened, and the opposition didn't gain anything, and you felt that excitement from 2008 politically on the ground in the art scene. Really, really interesting time. Stuff that you felt that cannot say. You go there and people are, hey, can sing about this. Oh, I can do this. Wow, yeah. So people taking chances, but now it's gone back because streaming and people becoming, standard very schema as Malays call it, So yeah, the politics and that. I think all musicians are very aware about politics, but what they don't sing about, or how they look, or how they don't look. So, but the frustration to me is that they don't express that understanding of politics and power as in their works, because they feel that cannot sell that doesn't become commodified, or doesn't become part of lifestyle. So hopefully that makes sense. Definitely the politics shape everything, man, in Malaysia.
Yeah, I agree. There's one more thing that that I would like to point. Maybe we can think about later, is about nostalgia and the idea of a romanticism. When you hear just now, Pat Wiki, he was telling how he grew up in his hometown, and how listening as a young boy, listening to the sounds of gamelan, and also Dato' M. Nasir was talking about how he used to listen to pop songs from Sumatra. These are all nostalgia, I think nostalgia plays a very important role in reviving or in trying to recreate the sounds or the idea of Nusantara music, besides political. So I don't know, maybe we can think about later on the idea of romanticizing your childhood or your past and trying to revive it in a modern sense. So that idea is, I think, an important part of this whole idea of Nusantara-ness or Nusantara, the idea of modernizing Nusantara music, something like that. So if you see the pioneers of Nusantara music in the 1990s, they started off playing rock or playing jazz. It was later that they realized, hey, we can do something new, and trying to recall back what they hear like 20 years ago and trying to recreate back those sounds and also the political aspect of it. And when I was talking to M. Nasir, he told me that they were in a group. Okay, so came this one guy. Okay, they pulled them together, Mananga, M. Nasir, and Ana Abu Hassan. Okay, come, I will promote you guys. We go to TVs. We create this new genre called Nusantara. So this they are people. These are all organized, and they have plans.
Yeah.
So the same thing I think with Pak Dwiki. He was doing it for Indonesia. He was being sponsored by the government. He was being sponsored all over the world to promote Indonesia. So these are all, I think it has some political, not just cultural, it's just political, influence involved. We were talking about top-down and, local agency, but I think it involved maybe 70% top-down and 40 or 60% top-down idea of trying to promote what we call Nusantara music. I don't know. What about you guys?
I think it's actually an important point, this idea of rindu, right? Let's put it in local terms. I mean, we talk about hijra. Let's just put it in rindu, right? Rindu and perantau, loss and longing. You have jauh di mata di hati, right? All of that is not only, you have that in Selendang Mainang, you have that in the traditional lagu. You can see it as well in Balada Nusantara, that pining for things past, life past, or even in Balik Kampung as well, right? You talk about the people who are but shadows that pass before your eyes, the people of the Kampung. So I think that because of the mobility and because of the distance that people actually have to travel in order to earn a living, in order to have these sorts of exchanges in between peninsula and island or inter-island exchanges, I think that the other side of hijra is rindu. That's something that I'm hearing or I've actually thought about quite a lot in my work. I don't know what others might think of that concept of rindu and how it kind of runs through your work.
I think it makes sense because if you're away, and I think that shows about the mobility and fluidity of movement in Nusantara. Why this very melancholic, mendayu-dayu lah. It's such a Nusantara thing also, right? We're great at that. So I think it's probably because of that. It might be just because the geography and people being away, that's just very interesting. And definitely the nostalgia, I'm thrown into that too. I would, imagine, wow, what my ancestor from Sumatra or Java last time, how they feel, So, and that the imagining ourselves through nostalgia also, I think, is a big part of that, right? The rindu and the hijrah, even though it's imagined, but it gives you a sense of identity and place, I think. Minor chord.
If you don't mind me, just cutting in, because there's like some considerable work on nostalgia and how nostalgia is inherently political. There's a concept of structural nostalgia that Herzfeld talks about. I mean, it's very simple. Like we tend to relate these moments of time, whether if it's historical in terms of imagining our nation, we will relate a certain time, a point of time in that history of that nation, and then bring that forward to reenact a feeling of rootedness or identity, you know. So that nostalgia, that going back to time actually creates your sense of structure and identity of self. So like I think we look at the Balada Nusantara period, the 1990s. My kind of take on it was like that's the time of Malaysia as the, you know, as an up and coming, you know, Asian tiger, right? With Tun Mahathir leading the way with national progress. So the 90s, right? That period, the 90s, is that period of progress that I think people are now might be longing for. So Nusantara then becomes a kind of a structural base, a nostalgic base of defining what, for us in Malaysia, what Malaysia is, what the Nusantara is. You know, it's an idealized point of time that we refer to. And we're also referring now, Azma and I are thinking about that singer-songwriter scene in the early 2000s with nostalgia as well. So we're also defining our own tropes of what forms our own definitions of music scenes and whatnot. But yeah, that's personally my take. Nostalgia is, for me, nostalgia is inherently political, and how that's mobilized in music aesthetically and also textually, you know, that's how it's going to come out. And of course, taking into consideration everything else that everyone has said.
Okay.
I think this might be one of our last questions from Omar Hussein. In Malaysia, non-Malay bands such as Alley Cats and Sweet September were famous due to their singing in Malay. Perhaps there's a consideration in commercial terms to use the Malay language?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer to that is the market share of people who speak the Malay language, including Bahasa Indonesia, right, in the perantauan, in the region. You know, it just makes monetary or market like sense in making popular music to try to reach that language market, right? And of course, Malaysian musicians since the 90s have tried really hard to break into a very difficult and protected Indonesian market. And Indonesia also likewise protects that market. And it is also, yes, it's definitely defined by the language. I would want to just say two things and then I'll pass it on. When we're talking about the use of Malay in defining, right, this Nusantara music or identity, I think there are two considerations from the Malaysian case, and you raise Sweet September and Alley Cats, very important Malaysian bands of non-Malay ethnicity singing in the Malay language and gaining a lot of success in the Malaysian market at that time. There are two considerations. One is we can consider Malay as historically as a widely spoken lingua franca that can actually connect a lot of people who have grown up, who has been in this region, regardless of what ethnicity they are, whether they consider themselves as part of a diasporic community or an indigenous community or a national community. There is a lingua franca of Malay that connects. So yes, musically, you can use that language to connect people. But the other thing to consider in the case of Malaysia, I think in Indonesia, there are specific examples. In the case of Malaysia, in 1971, there was the implementation of the National Cultural Policy by the government. And it was actually a response to the racial tensions actually in the country. There was a racial riot in 1969. So the result, aside from the national economic policy, there was also the cultural policy, which emphasized the use of Malay and Islamic elements in the arts. And Prof. Tan writes a lot about this, the use of Malay in the arts. And that actually affected the broadcast industry in Malaysia, whereby if you wanted to have your content, your music out, it had to be in the Malay language, the national language. So a lot of these bands who were very good at singing Afro-American songs in English, it made sense for them to record in the Malay language. I mean, that's what I'm finding out, at least in some of my historical research in that period. So yes, of course, yeah, absolutely, there's a commercial consideration, but I mean, I think the politics is coming out also, right? I mean, there were political moments that imposed, these top-down moments that imposed the use of a language. But I think we have to see the nuances between the two, which is we have to think about it as, yes, you can say that Malay was imposed, but at the same time, I mean, it was the lingua franca of the era. So how do we want to unravel these issues with specific cases? I mean, we should talk about also the neglect of indigenous languages, right, and other languages as well in the Nusantara.
Yeah. I'm just curious if there are any English, bands in Indonesia performing in English. If there are, and how are the responses from the audience? I mean, from the market. Can you earn a living playing English songs or locally produced English songs in Indonesia?
I have two friends like that. I asked that question too. How do you tahan?
Okay, maybe I will answer. Before the Reformation, actually, we cannot find. Maybe there is a English song, but we cannot find it popularly in Indonesia. But now there is a lot of English song in Indonesia, because maybe there is about the globalization and also about the market, global market, or a lot of English song in Indonesia now. And there is an regulation about that things, so we can create English songs, and then but a lot of market love Indonesian song. Is actually, this is also in a global market, like Loki from Nikki. So there's actually a lot of from Indonesia to the global market.
Yeah, I think that at something there's like a Rich Brian, the rapper from Indonesia, and moved to I moved to America, but there is like a Pamungkas to the Bond. The title is To the Bond, but I think that the platform like Spotify, there's like the similar platform. I think that create the opportunity to sing in English, and there are many I think that right now.
Okay. So I think we're coming towards the end of our panel for now, and we want to leave a bit of time because we are going to have a song by Asmiel that's going to be played by Port. But this discussion of songs and borders and politics, it's reminding me a little bit of a viral YouTube image that I saw right during the Myanmar coup, where you had a person who was actually physically exercising to Ampun Abang Jago, which is actually, sort of a viral hit from Indonesia, and it went worldwide because as you have an authoritarian coup happening in Myanmar, she's, grooving out to Ampun Abang Jago, which is basically a song that talks about, sort of dealing with issues of power and place. Yeah, so that I think is kind of a way of thinking, like what extends the borders of Nusantara? How far does it go? Does it go all the way to Myanmar? But I do think that in this this sort of Indonesia, Malaysia, southern Thailand, the Philippines, even to some degree up into what we in Western academia term mainland Southeast Asia, I think the exchanges, interactions, cultural exchanges go back so many years, so many generations. And I'm hoping that these sorts of discussions about Nusantara will help us kind of try to think beyond just modern nation state borders in terms of musical and art expression. So that's about all from me. Do we want to have any last statements from our editors of the volume before we play Asmiel's video? Adil or Mako?
I mean, just to please do get a copy of the book if you're interested. If you're in an institution, you can get it from Routledge.com. I believe in Malaysia it's being sold in Kinokuniya. And that I will share in the Facebook link later a promo code where you can get online discount. I mean, if I know the book is expensive, it's a New York press. But if you are in any institution, any university, any place that has a library, and if there's a budget for it, I would urge you to ask your institution to get a copy of the book. It is an academic book, so we're hoping that it is obviously not complete. Like I will emphasize again, the project doesn't end with the book, right? And I hope more and more of you who are listening, who are researching your own music in this region, this collective region, can contribute more. I mean, all of us are very in the Nusantara spirit. We're all very collaborative in how we work. everyone in this roundtable works together, and that's exactly kind of how like the music industry is, as well in the long duration of it. So I will share the discount code, and thank you so much to everyone here for participating and for contributing to the book. And thank you so much, Patricia, for your wonderful moderation and discussion and tying in everything together for us. And also, of course, I want to just thank Port Ipoh for doing this amazing event that I think serendipitously tied in so well with the release of our book this year. So kudos, syabas, tanya kepada Port Ipoh. Terima kasih banyak ya yang saya ucapkan. Sorry, I didn't want that to be like a final statement, but other people can chime in as well.
Jumpa lagi.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Imri.
So with that, I think it is important, to kind of remind everybody that this is part of a larger work and or a larger ongoing project. And I think that we would all really like to say terima kasih kepada, the Ipoh Music Symposium, as well as to Port Ipoh. And I think in respect of their time, unfortunately, our session has come to an end, but I will cede sort of control of the board back to Port Ipoh and let them take us out with Azmil's song. And the song is For Better Days by Tugas Nusantara.
Aku saudaramu, kamu saudaraku.
Aku saudaramu.
Ya, aku saudaramu.
Dan kamu saudaraku.
Kita semua.
Ya, kita semua.
Kita bersaudara.
I travel down the road, crossing mountains and the seas. One thing I always dream is the beauty of the better days. And it won't be long now, we're coming home again.
We need a heart-to-heart and join our hands together now. No grudge, no bitterness will take us somewhere peaceful then. So come on, my friends, we're going home again. I see the colors shine in kindness we unite. May all hearts be ready now. Together we laugh and cry for better days, for better days. We're coming home.
Terima kasih Dr. Pat dan ahli-ahli panel yang lain. Moga-moga penonton persidangan meja bulat ini mendapat manfaat, idea dan perspektif baru dalam pembacaan buku tersebut. Terima kasih.